Hey everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 of my Water Weirdo digital inking demo. So if you haven't checked out part 1, please do so. You don't have to, but I guess it kind of helps to just see how we got to where we are now. If you like the video, please hit the like button. And if you would subscribe, I'd be grateful. So here we are, picking up where we left off last time. I'm just adding some shadows here to the Water Weirdo's cloak of seaweed, which is actually its skin. And I'm just trying to figure out sort of a balance between shadows and highlights. The tongue is coiled up in its mouth. The tongue is actually part of it. What makes it so dangerous, I guess, is a monster. It can attack people with it. In retrospect, I probably should have had it kind of lolling out of its mouth to kind of give it a little bit more of a presence, but maybe it's more realistic to have it hidden inside of its mouth a bit. I always love to put in those droplets of saliva, in monsters' mouths too. So, yeah, like I said the last time, I'm sort of discovering kind of where the light source is and what it's sort of hitting. What is in shadows, and this is sort of when my wife came over and was like, that seaweed looks like feathers. It doesn't really look like seaweed. So I would have to go back in and give it a little bit more curves, I guess, to give it more of a seaweed type feel. I don't really like to use photo reference at all when I'm drawing. I like to be in the drawing and kind of not taken out of the drawing experience too much. I also feel like if I'm using too much reference, I fall into this trap of just trying to be too realistic or trying to be too beholden to the reference itself, and it kind of stifles me a bit. My creativity kind of gets sacrificed a little bit, I feel like, in order to create an illusion of something. I feel like it's very limiting. So all of this seaweed texture is just from my very limited experience looking at and interacting with seaweed in my life, trying to use my memory as my only reference basis for this image. I also really feel like with comic book art, and I guess by extension RPG artwork, it's really just sort of about the feel of this stuff and the feel of seaweed on a creature at night in some kind of light, like a flashlight or something like that. So it doesn't have to be totally photorealistic. It just has to give this kind of impression of seaweed. And so I'm doing that kind of just by giving a little bit more, some more curves in its leaf structure. And I think the only time I've ever actually dealt with seaweed is, in some kind of lake, swimming in a lake as a kid or something like that, and feeling it under my, at my feet when I'm in deep water, and it's trailing upward from the bottom of the lake bed or whatever. So I'm trying to, figure out how this harsh light that's coming in from the left side of the image, eventually it'll be there, is going to be striking the figure, and how much of these leaves of seaweed are going to recede into darkness and how much are actually going to be struck by the light itself. So I'm just getting kind of an approximation. I don't want it to be too much in shadow, and I don't want it to be too much in highlight either. I'm returning to the face. I'm just kind of skipping around here now, just pulling some highlights out of the shadows, adding some darks, everything. This is one of the things I love about Clip Studio is, I think I probably mentioned this in other videos too, is how I love the ability to turn whatever tool you're working with into an eraser. It's unlike Photoshop. I hate Photoshop for inking. Unfortunately, I love Photoshop as a program. It's so deep and can do so many different things. But one of the things that it's not very good at is drawing. or inking like how I want to ink. So yeah, and so I just realized that I want more light to sort of be coming in on hitting this side of the creature's face, and so I'm eliminating some shadows and creating more shadows on the other side, trying to strike that balance and give it that good Wally Wood EC Comics vibe. And so yeah, I'm just moving left to right over the figure. I really don't want to be redoing all of these leaves. I don't really have a choice, because if something's just not working in the drawing, you gotta change it, Same thing with painting too. You just gotta paint over and try another pass at it. But the helpful thing is that I know what I want the seaweed to look like. Or better yet, I know what I want the seaweed to sort of feel like in black and white. I want, or as a cartooned seaweed form. So it's not that difficult to imagine. The worst part is when you don't know what you want and you are just, flailing about trying to figure out how you want some kind of surface to read, and you're unsure, and that can always come through it, like that lack of certainty. So I'm being pretty decisive on how I want this seaweed texture to kind of work and the seaweed form to look. And I'm trying a little bit to picture the form moving around. It's basically a giant cylinder, right? The leaves of the seaweed in the front are going to be thicker than the leaves of the seaweed on the side, because the ones on the side are going to be seen a little bit more in profile. And so they're going to be a little bit closer together. And so I'm trying a little bit to do that, or just at least be cognizant of it while I'm doing it. Don't push it too hard in that direction, but I'm aware of I want this thing to look like it's a three-dimensional object, and do what I can with what I can to create that illusion. And yeah, I'm just putting more and more into the shadow. There's a great N.C. Wyeth illustration. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was for Treasure Island, and it's of a guy, walking down a street, and he's got a cane, and he's hollering, and he's coming toward the viewer, and he's got a cloak on, and all of him is basically in shadow in this cloak. Like hardly any of his figure is actually able to be seen, but so much information is hiding in that shadow that you don't even really need to see his body at all, rendered in any way, because your imagination just fills in what it looks like in the shadow. And so I'm sort of trying to employ that technique a little bit here, where, I want the shadows to kind of work for me. I don't want to have to put in too much detail overall. I want to let a lot of this sort of be in shadow, let the shadows kind of carry a lot of the weight here. And in order to do that, you kind of have to have a pretty good literacy in how light works, So I've done a lot of formal training with still lifes, and even done it by myself in grad school. I gave myself an assignment to just do still lifes of the shapes that Cezanne talks about that are always found in nature. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but basically it's like a cylinder, a cone, a sphere, a cube, maybe a pyramid. I'm not sure. But basically, if you can master how light hits all of those forms, and understand just how light interacts and plays off of all of those forms, and how light renders those forms, you're able to kind of capture that later much more easily, especially if you're drawing from imagination. So I wanted to do that myself. And I think also just looking at a ton of comic book artwork, a lot of guys that had a lot of formal training in this sort of stuff, it really shines through, especially with a guy like Wally Wood, or, Jim Steranko. Although I don't know what Jim Steranko's sort of background in art education is, But he was a real student of Wally Wood, I feel like. But all those EC guys were just so knowledgeable about how to render form with just black and white artwork. So yeah, I'm going back into the barnacles and pulling out the highlights, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, rendering some of the lips here on the creature, taking a stock of where I'm at here, pulling back, here and there, and then jumping into specific focused spots to add some texture and some shadow. One of the things that I wanted to do was cover the creature with like droplets of water, but I wasn't really sure how to accomplish that with all of these leaves of seaweed as texture. So I punted a little bit here and just had the water sort of just dripping off him on like outside of the silhouette of the form of the creature. But I'm feeling pretty good about like how the seaweed is going. It's definitely an improvement. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you'll join me in part 3. I'll see you there. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.